Gamers, gals, non-binary pals, it's your boy, greatest Genesys player of the century, Konami's secret Q&A tester, Stevie Blunder. Of course, we have a little reaction minds to do for my favorite format. Even more than Advanced, even if Phantom Quartz is banned in this format. Anyways, we have Josh talking about Genesys. Not sure how I feel about Genesys at the moment. We're gonna watch it 1.5 speed because I'm extremely lazy. Fuck it. You guys can't tell me what to do. It's a long video. You want me to watch the whole thing? You should pay me for it. Actually, pay Josh for it because he pays my bills too. Anyways, check out Team Blunder and I guess I'll watch this Josh video. So, let's have a bit of fun with it.
First thing I want to start with is some Genesys discussion because I do feel at least from what I've been experiencing, the Genesys talks online have been getting a little bit quieter recently. You know, I still see people talking about it, but I had a pretty good time playing Genesys at YCS Bologna, and so I still wanted to talk about it and give a little bit of feedback on the format because there are a few things that I want to address when it comes to Genesys format and some of the discussion that I've seen online. So I entered Genesys on the Friday of YCS Bologna, and that is already the first thing that I want to emphasize on that I thought was handled really, really well at the first European YCS offering Genesys was that you...
Wait a minute. How did Josh get this playmat? How did he get the play? He never won a pod. Did you buy this, Josh? Did you spend money for clout? If so, honestly, I don't blame you.
Could play Genesys on the Friday of YCS Bologna, which was one of the main things that people at US YCS, yes. I believe, correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe at US YCS, if I remember correctly, you cannot enter Genesys on the Friday because the venue is open on Friday, but there's no public events, I believe.
Which
at least the
stupid.
last time I was there, that's what it was. And
legitimately, my least favorite thing about YCS is the fact that there's literally nothing to do on day 0 outside of like buy cards from vendors. Like they just have the whole thing.
So the way it works at European YCSs is, of course, the venue is open on Friday, and you can play public events on Friday. And the Genesys Invitational, or the Genesys Qualifier, happened on Friday as well as on Saturday. And instead of multiple 16-player on-demand pods, there was one large Genesys Qualifier on Friday and one large Genesys Qualifier on Saturday. And basically, the way that one worked was there was 4 rounds of Swiss, basically. And if you went 3-1, you were qualified for the Invitational on Sunday. So if you go 3-1, you get the playmat and you qualify for Sunday. If you go 4-0, you get the pick.
If you go 3-1, you qualify? That's bullshit, dude. Oh my god. For those of you who don't know, at least in America, the only way for you to get a playmat was through the Genesys Invitational pods, obviously. But the big caveat was that you had to win the pod. It wasn't enough that you had to make it to the finals. Where again, people who had 3-1 records did, so it was already easier for people to qualify. But you had to win the whole thing. You had to go completely undefeated in your pod, which again, it's like 4-0. It's not like the hardest thing in the world. Like people have done it before. Spoilers, but oh my god, going 3-1 out of 4-round locals to win a $300 playmat. My fucking Christ, they were handing out money at this event, dude. They're just like, come right in. Here's $300 for free.
A Starlight Rare, and you get the playmat, and you get the invite. Which I thought was awesome for a multitude of reasons. So I just wanted to give a shout out to how the European staff or organizers handled this. Because I thought it was nice to be able to play this on Friday. Because it means that you don't have to decide between Genesys and the main event, right? That was one of my main concerns with Genesys format. If you remember, when they announced the format, I was like, okay, but if the only way to play this is at YCS, am I going to have to decide between playing Genesys or the main event if I go to a YCS? And the answer is no. Because what I did was I went there on Friday, I signed up for Genesys, I played Genesys on the Friday, I did go 3-1, I played Draco Tail, we can talk about that in a second. So I secured the playmat, and I also qualified for the Sunday Genesys Invitational. Which, let me tell you, that to me felt really nice because when I played the main event on Saturday, I always had in the back of my head, like, okay, if I don't do well today, I can play the Genesys qualifier tomorrow. I basically already had the invite for a cool tournament on Sunday, which always, like, I don't know, it just helped take some pressure off. And luckily, in hindsight, I didn't need the qualification because I did well in the main event for the YCS. But in case I got unlucky or things didn't go my way, I could have always gone back and played the Genesys Invitational, which is a really cool thing to do. Also, just in general, as a public event, the pricing for Genesys is pretty nice. So I think this is like one of the best ways to get people interested in the format because the pricing for these events are nice. Look, a side event where you play 4 rounds, if you go 3-1, you win the Genesys playmat. If you go 4-0, you can basically pick any Starlight of your choice. That's pretty good pricing for a 4-round public event.
Okay, so they still have the Starlight locked. Again, for Genesys, at least at like Anaheim, only, again, the winner pod, the 4-0, they were able to get the Starlight pick. I think they had literally every Starlight, according to one of the Konami staff that I talked to. And I was like, wait, what's stopping someone from just going on TCG Player and finding the highest like price Starlight and then just going down the list based on availability? And they just like looked at me and they were just like they were just like that told me everything I needed to know.
on top of all that, you qualify for an invitational on Sunday where the pricing is also really good. You know, first place in the Sunday Invitational wins a Dark End Dragon and a giant card pot of greed. So all things considered, Genesys is offering really good pricing. And also, you can play it on the Friday, so it does not compete with the main event, right? So that's pretty awesome. So that's all the things that I wanted to say, like just related to the event itself, not the actual format. Also, I guess one small thing, it was the fact that it wasn't the fact that it was Swiss rounds and not like a KO bracket. I thought was also pretty cool because it didn't matter when you lost. Like for example, I went 3-1, but I lost the second round, meaning that if it was KO system or like in a single elimination bracket, I would have been out by the second round. And I would have to go back, sign up to another pod, and keep trying and trying and trying. I thought this way was cooler. I thought it was more chill. The actual format of Genesys, I played this deck. I don't want to go over the deck list in too much detail. I posted it on Twitter if you've been following me there. So basically, I played Draco Tail because of the huge popularity of Droll and Lockbird, and that is something I want to talk about in a second. And I'm not sure how I feel about Droll in this format, but I guess we're going to talk about that as well. I played Draco Tail because Droll was very popular, and I wanted to play a deck that doesn't completely suck into Droll and Lockbird. And I didn't play Radiant Typhoon because I didn't want to play Radiant Typhoon mirror matches all day, basically. And just for those that are interested in Genesys format, the points breakdown for this deck as of now is 5 mana is 20 points, so 2 5 manas is 40. Mululu is 5 points, so that is 55. Nibiru is 5 points, so this is 70. K2 Draco Tail is 10 points, so that makes it 80 points. And Arthalion is 20 points, so we only get to play one Arthalion, and that's 100 points total for the deck. So essentially, the way I decided to play the Draco Tail engine, I made it 85 points for Draco Tail and 15 points for Nibiru. And Nibiru over Droll because I just enjoy playing with Nibiru more than Droll and Lockbird. And realistically, I think both Droll and Nibiru are kind of like, against the combo decks, I think they're both relatively equal in power level, and I just enjoy playing more with Nibiru, so I decided to play Nibiru. I don't want to go over the deck list in too much detail, but yeah, I played some Kaiju, so I have outs for like Liger Dancer or Super Quantum and stuff like that.
Again, fakest card. I think that this card is bait.
And other than that, it's just a relatively straightforward Genesys Draco Tail deck. I thought it was pretty good. I liked it. I do think they're probably going to increase the points on Draco Tail a little bit. But yeah. My round.
He is correct. Draco Tail Flame should be getting some point bumps. There's probably going to be some adjustments to like maybe the big dragons, honestly. There's an argument to like increase the points of like Pan and Urgula to like 1 or maybe even like 2. Because being able to just like slot in a bajillion of these fucking guys and then just like being able to just play all these guys in combination, and if you ever get like a 4 material fusion off, like congratulations, you're smoking fucking fat penises, bro. But side note, I think that GamCL outside of like Draco Tail or like Kaijus in general, they're pretty bait. Your deck should be able to have some sort of native out to Liger Dancer, and if you play a rank 4, that out is called Light Dragonatic Dister, so congratulations. Pop off, King.
So it started off pretty cool. I played against Centurion in the first round. I guess one of the things that needs to be said about Genesys format at the moment is that, and I will say that I'm willing to accept it for the beginning of the format because it is still relatively fresh and they are collecting data and they are working on it and there is frequent updates and stuff like that. And so far, I think the direction that things have been going are pretty good. So I'm not too worried about it at this point, but there are definitely some outliers in terms of what some decks are capable of doing in Genesys format. And I can only speak for myself, but I guess you can let me know how you feel about this. But I personally play Genesys format not because I want to experience some giga low power level, like basically like Time Wizard or whatever. Or I also don't want to, I don't want Genesys to be like Time Wizard or whatever. If I wanted to play a format at the power level of Time Wizard, I would play Time Wizard. The reason why I play Genesys is because, or rather what I want from Genesys and what I am experiencing or what I'm loving so much about Genesys is just the general play patterns that happen in this format, to me, seem more fair and a little bit more balanced because
that is true.
Some of the most unfair cards in the format that create a bunch of like non-games are taken out of it or have 100 points so people can't really use them, as well as just in general decks not having access to link monsters and stuff makes end boards a little bit more bearable, right? So I have no issue with the fact that people play modern decks in Genesys format, right? Like
I think that is a very fair assessment for why people like Genesys. It is fine to play modern decks in Genesys because most modern decks have certain amount of points adjusted. Think of like Draco Tail. Draco Tail in Genesys compared to Draco Tail in the TCG is like trying to compare like Bazook to like pure crack cocaine. Like it is just there is no analogy when it comes to that. Like this deck is a deck that actually does play pretty low to the ground. Maybe you end on like Goyamel plus one of your extra deck guys plus like your 3 traps. That is very different compared to the TCG or National where you're ending on like fucking 10 branded cards. Fallen and the Virtuous, fucking Spheres, and like Borreload Savage Dragon, and like 5 back row, and you're just like coming and shitting your pants. Like the end boards that decks are able to make and the power level of like what these decks are able to do, or more like the ceiling for what these decks are able to do is much lowered because of point adjustments or cards being banned or blah 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 blah. But obviously, there are definitely some outliers in regards to like certain decks like Draco Tail and some decks like fucking Autobot.
No problem with that. What I have a problem with is when certain decks or certain cards exist that, in my opinion, simply do too much. And this is not even power level related. It's just that the general play pattern of certain cards or certain decks are just, I resolve my combo and I win the game because my board is unbeatable or I summon a certain monster that you simply cannot out, right? Those are two things that happen frequently in advance constructed, and I was kind of hoping that it wouldn't happen much in Genesys format. Am I being clear? Do you understand what I mean? Like basically, and I will say that for like maybe 80% of decks in Genesys format, this is true, right? This is true for most of the decks that I've played against so far when I played Genesys format for example, at locals. Like most of the decks that I went up against, they would just make boards that it was always worth playing into. There was a lot of decks where if you didn't hand trap them, it was completely fine to just play into them with your engine. And I do think there's a couple of outliers in Genesys format where they haven't been handled yet, I guess. What should happen then? That's what Yu-Gi-Oh is in general, though. See, I guess that's where I guess I disagree. I generally don't think that is what Yu-Gi-Oh is in general. Maybe that's because I've been playing Yu-Gi-Oh for a very long time, and I think the majority of times that's not what Yu-Gi-Oh has been. And
yeah, very true. Yu-Gi-Oh should never reach a point where you resolve your full combo and you automatically win the game. I personally think that to some degree, every engine should be able to compete with every other engine to certain extents. Like obviously War Rock shouldn't be able. Obviously some engines are going to be worse or better than others just by like natural game design. Like obviously War Rock is never going to be able to compete with like fucking Draco Tail. But there are definitely some decks that no matter how much engine that you have in your hand, or no matter how like optimized your engine is, like you can open any 5-card hand you want, you're not going to be able to push into like a Vanquish Soul K9 board. You're not going to be able to push into the Yummy Mitsurugi board. Like those decks just put up way too much shit.
Also don't think that Genesys is super far away from that. I think Genesys basically is like 80 or 90% of Genesys matches that I've experienced so far were that. But there's a couple of very obvious outliers, and I don't think it's too hard to spot. And also, I'm not even saying that there shouldn't be any combo decks. Combo decks in general are fine. I do think that also a lot of the combo decks in Genesys format have counterplay, like meaningful counterplay. But there's what I mean is specifically like I don't know, round 2, I sat down against an Onomat player, and subjectively, I personally find Onomat to be a pretty annoying deck, but that is my problem. The deck can exist. My problem was that I didn't open a single hand trap in one of the games, and my opponent just summoned a Rongo, which made it completely impossible for me to even play the game. Now, if the Onomat deck didn't have Rongo, it probably would still make a pretty strong board, even if especially if uninterrupted. But that board, maybe I could have played into. Maybe I could have played into the Onomat board with my hand, because my hand I remember was a pretty strong engine hand, and it had a Kaiju. I had like Kaiju, Rahu, Lucius, whatever, like, and a couple more Draco Tail names. Like, I could have definitely played into a board, even if it had like an Omni Negate or two, or a Spell Negate and an Omni Negate, or whatever they make in Onomat. What I couldn't do was play into a Rongo, because that card says your opponent cannot summon. And then after the match, and then I realized, like, oh, they realized they can play a lot of non-engine, because I asked them after, like, hey, what are you spending your points on? And they're like, yeah, Rongo is 31 points, so I can still play, like, here, Troll, and whatever else has points in their deck. And I'm like, Rongo has 31 points? That's insane.
Yeah. This is what I think every single person I've ever shown the Rongo deck to has said, like, verbatim. They're like, oh, is Rongo like 100 points, or is Rongo like 80 points or something? It's like, no, it's 31. And it's like, why is it 31? And they're like, yeah, you know what the problem is? Gossip Shadow. Like, bro, what the fuck? Shadow should have been fucking 0. Shadow's fucking useless. Who gives a shit about Shadow? Like, sure, you want to make like a giant Magnus? Congratulations, I'm gonna summon a fucking Kaiju. Like, good luck, buddy. Like, there is literally 0 reason why Rongo should be any amount of points, but whatever.
Basically, I was shocked to even see a single Golden Lockboard in their deck, because I'm like, what? Surely Rongo has 100 points. And you know, apparently, hear me out, okay? Apparently, they did the thing where they combined 2 cards to be 101 points, and so they can't be played together, and they gave Rongo 31 and Gossip Shadow 70. Just to make it clear, the card that says your opponent cannot summon monsters has 31 points, and the card that says I'm a rank 3 and you can attach me to another Exceed has 70. And here's the thing, right? Maybe you can give them the benefit of a doubt and say, like, okay, Gossip Shadow is a monster negate, so it deserves to have more points. Sure, okay, maybe both of them. If you don't want them to be played together, you can give them both more points. It doesn't matter. Like, if you think Gossip Shadow independently is a 70-point card, you can still give Rongo 100, and then they can still not be played together if you think that Gossip Shadow is such a good card. Whatever. Also, you can give them another benefit of the doubt and say, oh, that was on purpose, because they wanted people to be able to play Onomat, and so they gave them Rongo on purpose. To which I say, that's not good. That's not good. This is concerning. If they are willing to give decks Rhongomyniad just to make them playable in Genesys format, I don't know if I want that. I don't know if I want them to intentionally leave a freaking like broken, busted floodgate just so that they can push like one of the decks that didn't really quite make it in advanced constructed. That's concerning, in my opinion, for someone who wants to play more fair Yu-Gi-Oh in Genesys format. That is, and I don't know if I'm the only one with that. At least from previous discussions, I don't think I'm the only one who looks at Genesys in this way, where I'm hoping to get more fair gameplay in with Genesys. And I'm also 100% certain that Onomat makes a powerful enough board without Rongo. Like, this deck does not need Rongo to function. Basically, what I'm trying to say is that I really, really like the core idea of Genesys format. I really like how it's been implemented into YCSs. I think it's awesome. I think the underlying idea for the format is great. However, I think there is some play patterns that I simply don't want in Genesys format, and one of those play patterns is resolve Giga broken combo and win the game instantly. Because there is, in some ways, even less counterplay to that in Genesys, because all the hand traps, or most of the good hand traps, are pointed rather heavily, right? So a combo deck that is viable in Genesys is even more of a problem than a combo deck in Advanced Constructed, if you really think about it. You know, combo decks in Genesys format are a bigger problem because there's less ways for people to counter them. it's not as simple as, well, just play the cards that are good against Onomat, because you might not have the points for that in the decks you're trying to play. Because if
that's true. Like, point values are pretty fucking important. Onomat is a discount Ryzeal. Okay, here's the thing, Flame Flash. Discount Ryzeal is still pretty fucking good. Like, when people say that, like, you know, like, Gemknight Dispersion is just discount branded fusion, like, yeah, you're not wrong, but it's still pretty fucking broken. And yeah, he is correct. You cannot, like, it's very difficult to just be like, in advance you could just be like, oh, you just play more hand traps, or you just play the good cards in your deck in order to give yourself, like, edge versus certain decks. Like, you know, sometimes you just play, like, Perulia and Fuula. Sometimes you just play, like, Common Penis. Sometimes you just play, like, Cock and Balls. But in Genesys, you can't always play that. You have to make concessions with your deck building. And for some decks, and overall, I think that is a very fine thing, but it should not come at the cost of some decks existing that literally say that if you are playing a 100-point deck engine, such as Dracotail, you should die. Like, you're just gonna die and explode, and there's nothing you can do about it. It's fucked up.
That's the case, if you need all these hand traps just to deal with some of the combo decks in the format, then guess what? You are basically required to spend all of your points on hand traps, and then you cannot play decks anymore that need a couple of points. You can't build decks around some of the cards that have like 20, 30, 40, 50 points. They're basically eliminated because you need those points for hand traps. That's where Genesys needs to be. Genesys needs to be at a point where you don't have to play 15 hand traps. That's what's supposed to set it apart from Advanced Constructed, the way I see it. You know, the way I see it, this is the place where you can play a deck without 18 hand traps, because the decks are not auto-winning every time when they go first. And so if there is a deck that auto-wins going first, they need to do more about it quicker. And especially not leave Rongo at 31 points so that Onomat can see some play. Because those are play patterns that no one wants in Genesys format. And
does fucking everyone hate Rongo? I'm so sorry, Josh. I'll give you a discount on your shorts next week. I'll decrease it by 1 cent.
this all leads into Droll and Lockbird as well. Like, I understand that Droll and Lockbird, at the moment, a lot of people are happy that it's only 5 points because it beats Onomat. In an ideal world, Onomat isn't a thing, at least not at the power level it currently is in Genesys format, and then you don't need Droll and Lockbird, okay? I guess the same is true for Nibiru as well, you know, like Nibiru is, I think, all things considered, a much more fun card to play with than Droll, but for some rogue decks, it can definitely feel super overwhelming, and I think Genesys should try to do a better job at creating an environment where you don't need those cards just to be able to play the game. In an ideal world, Droll is 0 points and C0 play. I agree with you. In an ideal world, you create an environment where the card is simply not necessary. But for that to happen, they need to do more about those decks that just do too much. Right? So I guess in some ways what I am saying is I want Genesys to be at a lower power level, or rather like a more balanced thing where because against some decks it certainly feels like you lose the dice roll, they go first, they combo, you lose. And those are some decks that should be looked at, I think, for sure. So that's my experience with Genesys format. I would say at the moment like about 75-80% of the format is pretty fun and healthy, but the last 20%, obviously, especially when you play at a competitive tournament like the YCS Genesys Invitational, of course more people are inclined to play the really good stuff. But I'll say it, and I don't think I'm the only one. If Onomat making Rongo and Lunalight making Liger Dancers, because that's the deck that won the Invitational was Lunalight. If those are the type of decks that are the most popular in Genesys and the ones that are winning everything, I don't need to enter a Genesys tournament to get that kind of gameplay. Like, there's no difference to some of the decks in Advanced Constructed. Like, if
you just enter Advanced, go against Gemknight and get a Christia made versus you. Like, fuck.
That's what decks are doing. You literally have no reason to play Genesys, and I don't mean that in like in a super condoning or negative way, but like Genesys needs to set itself apart from that type of gameplay for me to want to play it. Because if it's like, if I sit down in Genesys and my opponent activates an Onomat card and I can only win the game if I have Droll and Lockbird in my hand, I might as well just enter a TCG tournament, sit down, lose the dice roll to Yami Mitsurugi, and only have a chance to win the game if I open Droll or maybe Fuwa. You know, like there's no difference. So yeah, that's how I felt about Genesys format. But the way things are going and in the entire year and in general, like I have some hope that they're going to address this properly. I'm not like too worried about it. That was my 2 cents on Genesys after playing it at YCS Bologna. What do you think about Fuwa and Genesys? I think Fuwa is fine. I mean, I have no issue with Fuwa. How did you have time to play Genesys and the main event? Because Genesys...
my main thing with Fuolos is that there are enough decks in Genesys that are actually pretty good that don't need to actually push into Fuwa. Like, obviously some decks like Onomat have to push into it, otherwise their decks literally don't do anything. But decks like Dracotail and Radiant Typhoon can either play into it on a very minimal level or not even play into it at all. Like, you can legitimately end on like Arthalion Malulu Pass, because you'll still have like everything in hand, and like sure your board's like a little weaker, but your opponent like resolved Upstart Goblin, like cool, like good shit, bro. And Radiant Typhoon literally does not even need to summon anything at times, because they're playing all the runic stuff, they're playing like the big bird or the cloud. Like those cards are able to just completely carry a Radiant Typhoon on their own. Like they don't need to make Totem Bird, they don't need to make Cicada King. They could just end on those cards, and like they'll get like 90% of the way there.
Was on Friday. The only thing that has me slightly worried about Genesys format is that like on the latest point update, or not point update, but they made a YCS Pittsburgh Genesys recap where they just talked about what's going on in Genesis, and they put a lot of emphasis. They put a lot of emphasis on like the deck diversity that's happening in Genesis format, which I'll give them that is there, like 100%. A few of the things I think that they wanted Genesis to achieve were achieved. So Genesis is a place to play some decks that are not good enough for advanced constructed. Looking at stuff like Onomat, like Radiant Typhoon, like the Archmage, like it is a place where you can play those decks. That is good. That is awesome. And there's also a lot of different decks in the format that are viable. It is a relatively diverse format, all things considered. Even though I would also argue this is because there is less competition happening, so it takes longer for people to figure out what the best decks are. And at the YCS,
spoilers, we already figured that shit out within like a week. I would not say that's actually the reason why that there's like more diversity. It's because like, you know, people are still figuring out the meta. It is very easy for, at least in this current information age, in regards to Yu-Gi-Oh! And Twitter and YouTube and YouTubers like me peddling you like fucking snake oil on like Gem Knights being the greatest deck in Genesis. There are a lot of reasons why people will just objectively not play the best deck. And one of the big reasons is specifically people just don't like them. Like, if you enter a tournament, theoretically, you should always be playing the best deck. You should always play cost. That's not a factor anymore. Cost is literally not a factor anymore. You could literally build Radiant Typhoon Runic, the best deck in Genesis right now, arguably, for like $30. You could build Onomat for $30. You could build Rhongomyniad Onomat for $30. You could build any tier 1 deck in Genesis for less than $100. And I know because I literally did that. Like, I have bought like 6 Genesis decks, and all of them are like dirt cheap. If you said this like pre-5Ds decks, then sure, I would be like more inclined to believe you. But post 5D decks, like cost for even like the most expensive hand traps like Perulia, Meows, whatever, does not exist anymore. Yeah, like Forbes' K9 Suship, like Suship K9 deck. That deck is like probably worth less in terms of monetary value to like the cost of entry for one of these pods. I would not be surprised if it is like literally under $20. But most people just don't want to play the best deck because most people don't like playing the best deck. People don't like playing mirror matches. People want individuality. People want to play decks that they personally find fun more than they do gaining percentage points and winning, even if that is not the completely optimal thing to do. Masquerade is his most soul expensive card. You could arguably just cut Masquerade. You could just not play it. You could play like, I don't know, a second Nash. You could say like play like, I don't know, a second Nash Knight or like another Valon or something like that. I think Masquerade's getting reprinted yet in Rarity 5, but you get what I'm saying. Like, I do disagree with Josh's point here in the sense where Genesis has a lot of diversity because people are whatever. People are only seeing diversity because people just want to play different decks. People want to play their fun little pet decks in the funny FTK format.
Yes, at YCS Bologna, if you walk down the row of like all the people that are 2-0 or 3-0 at the Genesis Invitational, you saw mainly Onomat and Radiant Typhoon. There was not like 20 different decks or something in the row of people that were successful. Like in the last round of Swiss, if you walk down the first couple of tables, it was a bunch of Radiant. So it's like the diversity aspect, I think you take it with a grain of salt. The biggest thing I think is that like even if the format is diverse, there's still certain decks that have certain play patterns that I personally think are not healthy for Genesis format in the long term. Should they make Genesis 2 with links and pendulums as the niche of a niche in 2027? No, they should not. I think
Genesis with links and pens. Holy shit, we made advanced.
I think the solution to this is easy. I think they simply have to. They have to be more aggressive towards auto wins. They have to be more aggressive towards floodgates. That includes stuff like Rongo, and they have to be a little bit more aggressive towards new decks. They have to be a little bit more aggressive towards new decks. Is the unfortunate truth. Like, I understand that you want your new decks to see play in Genesis format 100%, but like, look at Draco Tail. Draco Tail, you cannot even play the full core in Genesis format because they have so many points. And you also, like, I played 2 5 mana, 1 Arthalion, and 1 Ketu, which is a lot of restrictions on that deck. And I was still able to do well with Draco Tail in Genesis format. Showcasing that the power level of the format is lower, and also showcasing that it's completely okay for new decks to have heavy points on them. Like, it's no problem because of, like, you still have a lot of control over how you build your decks, and you also, you're competing with less powerful decks in general, and new decks just tend to be very powerful by nature because of power creep. So, like, hit new decks a little harder. Like, Radiant Typhoon would be a meta deck even if some of the Radiant Typhoon cards had 5 or 10 points right now. It would be no problem. And Onomat would be a meta deck even if Rongo had 100 points. Like, those things just need to happen preemptively. Otherwise, it's just going to be the same as Advanced Constructed with slightly different pictures, you know? Like, you're playing the same game with different pictures on the cards, which, yeah.
Spoiler alerts, you can also just play the Onomat FTK, which is a thing you could do for some reason. Very fun and balanced. Anyways, let me know what your guys' thoughts are on Genesis. I say this at the end of every video because I have nothing more interesting to say. Did you know that I like eating shrimp cocktail? That's pretty yummy. Anyways, let me know what your favorite shrimp is in the comment section down below. I like normal shrimp or the one that comes in the Costco cocktail, but that's just me. Anyways, bye-bye.